Hello and welcome to Stage Perspective. My name is Charles Peters, and our guest today is the very wonderful Wendy Waddell. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so happy to be here with you, even though it's virtually.
Yeah,
Still happy
absolutely.
to hang out with you.
Eventually, that won't be the case. I'm hoping to be able to do it live, and
I
then
know.
people can get up and show us some of their talents. They can sing or they can dance or whatever. So we'll see.
Sure. This is probably the best venue then for me. This doing
Exactly.
it in this format is
Sit
probably the best
quietly
for
and
me.
be
Yeah,
exactly.
sit
So
on my
Wendy, you
hands.
you and I
Yeah.
have known each other a long time. We
Yes.
have only worked together really once, I think, right? And that was communicating doors at Scripps Ranch Theater. Um,
And we really weren't even on stage together that much, even though we played husband and wife.
that's true. That's true. You have to know the play. And I've talked about this because Jackie and I talked about it. And it was like, it's too crazy to try and
Right.
recount the actual storyline, but it's time travel and love and life and choices and so forth. And yeah. But that and Carrie playing the mother in Carrie, I guess that was like the last thing you did before stuff shut down, right?
It really is. It's
Yeah.
so funny because I kind of forget that that was the last time that I was legitimately on stage because I was in rehearsals for Into the Woods,
Hmm.
and we were scheduled to open Saturday, March 14th,
Oh my gosh.
and the world shut down Friday, March 13th. So in my brain, I kind of think Into the Woods, but really no, it was Carrie, yeah, which was fall of 2019.
Yeah. But you
It's
went
so
out with a
crazy.
bang because that was a great show.
I did.
And I mean,
I
that's the
did.
thing. It's like at least you went out on a high note.
I did.
So,
I did. It was that was one of those roles that I never knew I wanted to play until I
right.
actually played it. And then I
Yeah.
went, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know what my career would have been like if I hadn't had Margaret
Yeah.
White on my
Yeah.
resume. So yeah, it was a great show.
For me, it was Italian American Reconciliation, although I just directed it, but it was a fantastic show because
I'm a
there
huge
was,
Stanley fan. I love
yeah.
that play.
And,
Yeah.
and I went like, went above and beyond as far as like the design of the set and the concept and stuff because I wanted to do it really differently. So I was proud about that. But whether or not, hopefully, I mean, people seem to enjoy the show and liked it and got good reviews, but
Yeah.
only time will tell. But so did you grow up here in San Diego?
I
Or were,
did. I did. It's funny. I call myself an almost native because
mm-hmm,
I technically was not born here. I was
mm-hmm,
born in Patuxent River, Maryland, which is a town nobody's ever heard of. It's a Navy town.
mm-hmm.
My father was in the military, so I was born there. But when my parents split when I was very, very young, we came back to San Diego because my mother's family was here. So it was really
Okay.
kind of my mom is a single mom trying to uh, surround herself with those that could help her raise me. And she knew she had this support system in my grandparents. So that's how we basically ended up back in San Diego. So we moved back here. I want to say it was 1980, 79 or 80 when I was about
Okay.
6 years old.
Okay.
So there,
Gotcha.
now you know how old I
Right. You have
am.
to do the math though. We're not telling
I
you.
know
You
it's
have to figure it
okay.
out.
It's all right.
So
I'm good with it.
so that's kind of like Jen. Jen, is my wife and she's
Right.
Canadian, but she lived in Canada she actually spoke French for the first 2, 3 years of her life and moved down here when she was two something. And
Yeah.
so she's an almost native, but she grew up
Yeah.
here and she's watched the town change. It's funny because there are people in town that people go, oh, and it's like, no, I remember you back when you weren't anything. So
Right.
don't talk to me about anything because I was doing stuff before you. So there's a lot of people. She's been around a long time, so she knows a lot of people from when they first started. So it's fun,
Yeah. And Jen and I go back over 20.
right?
Yeah, I want to say over 20 years
Yeah,
because she and I
yeah,
knew each other through the Fritz Theater,
right, exactly. Yeah,
which is how Jen and I knew each other.
yeah.
She SM'd a show that I was in for the Fritz Blitz.
What
And
show
we
was that?
became, I think it was, she'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was a show called Scott Stein's First Play.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It was a very strange little show that Katie Rada directed.
I've heard her talk
Um,
about that. Hmm.
yeah. So I think that was the one she SM'd. And I
Hmm.
think that might be the only time she and I really worked together. even though we've been friends for so many years and known each other for so many years. But yeah, the community here is really, we're very small, but there's also this longevity. The
Yes.
majority of the people that I know in this theater community have been in my life for decades.
Right.
And I really love that. We don't
Yeah.
go very far.
Yeah.
We stay here.
There is a lot. They either move away or they go to LA or they take off and go do other thing, or they stop the biz, they go do other
Right.
stuff. And that's a lot of people. The first thing I ever saw you in was Off the Ground.
Oh my gosh.
At
New Village
I had
Arts.
just started dating Jen, and so
Okay.
Charlie was in that as the grandfather.
Yes.
And Sandra Ellis Troy was playing his daughter.
Yes.
Which was funny
Sandy
because they were,
my mom.
I think she was older than him.
Yeah, she probably was. She probably was. I adored that show. That was a lot of fun. And it was a great cast.
Yeah. And John DeCarlo was in that.
John DeCarlo played my brother.
Right.
And Jack Missett played my dad.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Joanne Glover.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. She was in that. And then Terry, and I'm so bad with last names. I want to say his last name was Scheit. I think that was his last name, played my husband. Isn't that terrible when you can't remember?
There were a lot of people in that show, though. It was about a cast of about 8 or 9 people.
Yeah, it was a fairly large group.
Yeah. My funniest story with that is how people are in theater, and there was an old couple in front of us, and it was towards the end of the show, and John had a little dialogue talking to Charlie on stage, who's trying to watch television. Yeah. And he goes, I don't know. My life is just a mess. I can't seem to get it off the ground. And that's the title of the show. And when he said that, the guy in front of us went, oh, there it is. Like he was waiting the whole show for that.
Why is this show called this? Yeah.
It's like, wait, it's like how you wait for the title of a movie. So roll the credits. Yep.
Yeah. No, that was a fun show. That show ran over 2 different Christmases. So I was lucky enough to do that one twice. And it was written by local artists as well. Tom Zohar and Amy Keeney co-wrote that one. So
who directed it?
That's so funny. I didn't realize that was the first time you saw me on stage.
And then I think I ran into you at like Fred Harlow's Thanksgiving party.
Probably.
That was like the first time we got to know each other and then worked together and communicating doors. And then of course, Jen did sound for Carrie. That was about it. So that's our connections there. Yeah. So
that's right.
So how did you get started? Because you've had a nice longevity in town, obviously, and you've worked a lot of different theaters, which I want to talk about in a little bit. But I mean, you've been here a long time. We just talked about how long, you've been in town. But what got you started in theater, and where did you start?
Well, the story my mother tells, and I have to trust her because I don't remember, was that when before we moved back down here to San Diego, when she and my father first split, we actually wound up in LA. And part of that was she also has a brother, and her brother, my uncle, was living in LA. And so they were kind of helping each other out, both young single adults. And my mom was teaching at a private school. So I got to go to the private school tuition free. And I think what it was they were offering a ballet class, something to that effect. At any rate, I ended up joining the class after they had already started classes, and they were in the midst of mounting The Wizard of Oz. And all of the little kids were the Munchkins. So even though they were already in rehearsals, my mom tells the story that when I took the class, I started in the back row of the Munchkin squad. And by the time the show opened, I had made my way front and center. And she said, as soon as she saw that, she realized this was probably what I wanted to do. Like, this was in my blood. I don't remember. I have no memory of that because I was probably about 4 or 5. But what I do remember, some of my first memories of theater were after we moved down here. We lived in Coronado, which is where my grandparents lived. And my mom ended up finishing her teaching career in the Coronado School District. So I went to Coronado schools from 1st grade all the way through 12th. And my mom was very close friends with the drama teacher. And every year they would do the spring musical, and the spring musical was a show that encompassed all of the different grade levels, not just high school. And the first show that I remember doing for them was Sound of Music, and I played Gretel.
Hmm.
And that's one of my very first acting memories, was playing Gretel in the
Mhm.
Sound of Music. And that show forever has a very sacred place
Yeah.
in my heart, the stage version as well as the film, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I also think part of what took me into theater too, other than recognizing early on that this was just kind of in my DNA, was my mom. Once we moved back here, my mom, who is a beautiful singer, wanted to get back into doing some musical theater. So she started doing some community theater, and I would tag along because, you know, she's a single mom doing this. And so I would
Right.
be in go to rehearsals with her. And I ended up auditioning and doing quite a bit of community theater when I was young. I did things like Fiddler on the Roof, and South Pacific, and My Fair Lady, and Barnum, which is a very rarely produced show because it's a big deal. But I remember I think we were the West Coast premiere of the musical Barnum, and I was a baton twirler in that. So yeah, you know, it was kind of happenstance, and then just kind of, I think, meant to be, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the beginnings for me, very, very young.
Yeah, you say it's in the blood, and I definitely believe that. There's something that just, you know, even if you try to walk away from it, there's something that just kind of, I can't seem to get away. I used to say,
Yeah.
I used to make the joke, God won't let me quit, you know, that
That's a
I
great
try
way
to
to
quit and God won't let me quit. Because the minute I go, I'm done, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot deal with the BS and this and this and this,
right.
all that stuff. And I walk away, and then somebody calls and goes, would you play so-and-so and the Elephant Man? You're like, oh my God, you know.
Yes.
It's
Yes,
like,
of
you know,
course I
or
will.
whatever it is,
Yeah.
something that you've like, oh, you know.
Yeah, I can't say no to
Yeah.
this type of thing. Yeah.
What were
No,
some of the
completely.
theaters you worked at? Some of those community theaters, are they still around, or?
Coronado Playhouse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
but at the old location,
Yes.
which a lot of people are not familiar with. If you're not a native, you may not know the old location. It was a little further down the Strand than it is now, and it was a very tiny stage that had this huge pole right in the middle of the stage because it was holding up the ceiling.
Right.
So there was always a very clever way that the pole would get incorporated into the show. I remember, I think one of the smartest ones was, I did Miracle Worker there, and they used it for the pump. So it became the pump in Miracle Worker. So you worked there. I worked at, what are some other community theaters where I've worked? Some of them may not be in existence anymore. Octad One, which was out here in East County. And interestingly enough, that's where I met Deanna Driscoll. She and I did a production of Othello together, where she played Amelia and I played Desdemona. What are some of the other theaters? I worked a lot with a gentleman named Tom Rush, and I'm going to forget the name of his theater company. Yeah, it'll come to me later, and then I'll tell you. But I did a lot of my mom and I did a lot of shows with Tom. That was who we did Barnum with, and South Pacific, Fiddler on the Roof. We performed in different venues. A couple of times we were at the Cornell Playhouse. I remember one time, I want to say it was the El Cordova Hotel, and we did Fiddler in the Round in kind of their dining area.
Yeah.
But maybe my memory is faulty there. I do remember doing Fiddler in the Round. And then we also performed at Santa Sophia Church that had an outdoor venue. That's where we did Barnum. And then there was I want to say like a community college, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, where we did, I did The Wiz. Which is probably so tone deaf now that I think about, the fact that I did that in high school, but I was a dancer in that in high school. Same theater group. And again, I'll have to think back on what the name of the theater company was. My mom would probably remember better than I would, but we kind of were part of his troupe of players. So we worked quite a bit with Tom. And then once I was in middle school and high school in Coronado, I did a lot with the with the high school shows. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, that's really where I cut my teeth, was
Yeah. Yeah,
community
like a lot of
theater.
people.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's surprising. I as I start to talk to people, I realize a lot of people that I'll look at their credits and I'll go, "Oh, they did like a lot of people, they worked in community theater to start out
Right.
because it's
Right.
kind of sort of an easy access sometimes." What was your first, like, what you consider would be a pro gig that you did? Like your big gig, like, I'm not doing community theater anymore. This is the real deal.
Gosh.
Or do you know that?
Well,
Do you remember?
yeah, you know what? I think probably my first like paying regular paycheck gig was with Playwrights Project.
Hmm,
I did, which is how I met Fred Harlow and Candace Paul,
right.
and Katie Rada.
Mhm.
We did, Fred and Candace and I were in the cast of a show called The Best Mistake. And it was like a 40-minute, 45-minute piece that toured around to different schools. It was part of their touring program, which I don't think they haven't done that for several years, but
Like an education program. Sure.
exactly
Right.
similar to like the pop tour, that type of thing.
Mhm.
And I did that in 2000, I want to say
Okay.
it was.
All right.
And Katie Rada was the stage manager. Candace Paul played two roles. She played my mother and my school teacher, and Fred played my dad.
Mhm.
I looked young enough at that point to play a 16-year-old. I was 25, I think, at the time,
Oh, I can
24,
believe that. Yeah,
25.
yeah, yeah.
And I played a 16-year-old. And the premise was that I was a young girl who was a very good student, raised by a single dad, who was a very accomplished guy, but she finds out that he actually never learned to read. He's
Mhm.
completely illiterate.
Okay.
And so the course of the play is kind of her helping him come to terms with that, and recognizing that he can fix this, he can still learn. But lifelong friendships really were formed, and associations were really formed with that show. I worked with Playwrights Project for years, not just as an actor, but I taught for them. I worked in their offices for a period of time. But I would say that was like my first professional gig, because we got paid weekly,
Mhm.
which I was like, this is cool. And it wasn't a ton of money,
Right.
obviously, but
Yeah.
it was enough where I could go, this is my job right now. I'm not
Right.
doing
Exactly.
anything else. And we toured for a couple months, and we went all over San Diego. And I think we even went up to LA a little bit to some schools. And we had one um, opportunity where we all flew to Washington, D.C., and we did the show in one of the Senate buildings. And it was to try to get some funding to take the show on a
Oh, wow.
national level, which
Hmm.
didn't happen, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
that I would say that was my first professional gig.
Hmm.
At
Wow.
least that's what I remember as my first
Yeah.
professional gig. And
Yeah.
I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah.
You know, just working with such great people, and under the leadership of Deborah Salzer, who is no longer on staff with Playwrights
Right.
Project. You know, she's retired, but she's the founder
Right.
of that organization, and she's a very good friend, and she's a great advocate for the arts, and she's a huge supporter. And I adore her. And I obviously am very close with Fred, and Katie Rada is my best friend. And, Candace Paul has been a very good friend over the years. So it was one of those really great um, serendipitous
Yeah.
moments in my
Yeah.
career. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Now
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier dance. Was
Oh,
dance a
God.
bigger part of your life earlier? And it kind of like, or was it just an influential part? See, like when I was younger, I took ballet and I
Yes.
took tap and jazz and did all of that. I'm probably a frustrated hoofer in some ways. And I did a lot of dancing in shows, but not so much anymore. But I know that was an influence, and music is a big influence just in general in my life. If I had to pick one art that everybody had to do, it would be music
Right.
always. Forget about
Right.
acting or anything else or painting or any of that. Music. If you can get if you had to cut all budget in schools, please keep music and make every
Yeah,
kid take a music class, so
I
because
agree. Music is
it just
fundamental.
speaks volumes to other things, and it just is an appreciation for other stuff. So, but yeah, how much dance were you doing back then?
I mean, I think I was kind of your standard. I took ballet, I took a little bit of tap, I took a little bit of jazz.
Right.
I didn't have the passion for it, or
Right.
really the discipline that
Yeah.
went into being a
Oh
dancer.
yeah. Yeah.
I stopped taking dance high school, maybe middle school, high school.
Hmm.
I don't remember exactly. But when I went to college, you had to take dance in the acting program that
Hmm.
I was pursuing. So got back into it in college. I was okay. I mean, I am no dancer. I am not
Right.
somebody that will ever show up for a dance call. But I have had auditions for shows where I've had to do some simple moves.
Right.
And, so far I've never fallen,
Yeah.
knock wood, but yeah, definitely not definitely not a dancer, not even a frustrated dancer. I'm just not a dancer. It's not
Well,
my
you move
thing.
well on stage though. So I think
I
that,
could one of my friends who's not a dancer said that he's an advanced mover, and I thought, I like that. That's what I'm an advanced mover. I can move. So there
that's
you go.
really it. I mean, that's why actors should
Yeah.
take dance. So it's like, you have control of your body on stage. So,
Yeah. But the older I get, the more sore I get too. I recognize. So I'm like, oh, I probably should take some dance just to kind of keep my
yeah.
limbs moving and the blood flowing. But yeah.
What are some of the influences when you were growing up? Like for me, I grew up watching a lot of like classic films,
Mm-hmm.
old Hollywood stuff. That was a big influence. Musicals were a big influence. How was it for you?
A lot of that is the same. I mean, I
Yeah.
grew up watching, obviously, like I said, Sound of Music is one in my top 5.
Mhm.
Fiddler on the Roof, I've always adored that movie version. If it comes
Yeah.
on, if I'm channel surfing and that's on, I will stop and watch that religiously. I remember I went through a period for about 6 months to a year where I watched 2 musicals on repeat. One was Bye Bye Birdie with Anne Margaret, and the other was Funny Girl.
Yeah.
And I would just kind of alternate between those two. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely a lot of musical theater. And my mom being a musical theater lover and performer herself, we had a lot of original cast albums, the
Yeah.
actual albums, those played a
Hmm.
lot.
Hmm.
So I think that actually fed into movies. I'm embarrassed to say that I wasn't as well versed in a lot of playwrights or composers at a young age as I wish I had been. That kind of came later for me.
Yeah.
Shakespeare was something I always really loved early on, but I wasn't somebody that knew Thornton Wilde or was familiar with John Patrick Shanley is somebody I fell in love with when you
Right.
mentioned Italian-American Reconciliation. That was a playwright I fell in love with in college. Wendy Wasserstein was another one because there weren't as many female playwrights back when I was in college. So, I think if I were to say who my major influences were, Rodgers and Hammerstein, big time, and Sondheim.
Yeah.
I actually, here's a fact some people know, I actually got to see the world premiere of Into the Woods when it was here at the Old Globe.
Wow.
In 1980, was that 86, 87?
Hmm.
I saw it before it went to Broadway, before Bernadette Peters was even in the cast. But Sondheim was in the audience the day we went to see that show. Our school went as part of one of the school matinees, and I'll never forget it. Never forget sitting in the audience and watching that show. And that turned me on to Sondheim. And at that point, my mom had the album company, and she said, "Oh, well, if you like that, then listen to this." And
Right.
and then that led to Sweeney Todd, and that led to Pacific Overtures. And so anyway, I'm like you, for a lot of my influences at an early age were primarily musical theater, more so I think than I guess what we call straight plays. So
Right. Yeah. My parents went to a lot of musicals. I mean, and I was taken to a lot of shows early on, starting at about 8, on. So you and Jackie Reds have a commonality there, because she did a show for Sondheim, an original work, years ago, that went to, I think she performed it in New York. Might have just been Chicago. I forgot. She and her husband, it was about a boxer, and I cannot remember the title of it to save my life, but
I'm trying to remember if she told me about this.
yeah, she said,
I would think I would remember. Maybe
they were on a first name basis. She said that was the fun part.
Oh,
They come back
of course.
because he wrote the show and he had a hand in, like, directing it and, bringing it along. So, because it was a new
Yeah.
work. Yeah, it's like it's about a boxer, and I cannot think what the name of it is. But anyway, so
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, so cool.
yeah. What's the biggest role that you've done that you would think of as whether that means like a large role or uh like a challenging role, like what what I mean, that can mean a lot of things, because biggest doesn't necessarily mean like number
Yeah.
lines of dialogue.
Um, One of the most challenging, well, I would say a lot of my challenges kind of started to come about when I decided to start doing musical theater.
Mhm.
Because I'd done musical theater as a kid, and then I went off to college and decided I couldn't sing and I didn't want to be a musical theater actor anymore. And then um, very, several years into my career here in San Diego, I thought, well, worst case scenario is they throw me out of the auditioning room. But I started doing musicals fairly regularly. So one of the biggest roles, and this is another one that I didn't realize I really wanted to play, was Golda. When I did Golda
Mhm.
and Fiddler on the Roof up at
Yeah,
the Welk,
right.
it was a long run. It was like 4 months,
Yeah.
and beautiful cast. Kathy Brombacher directed it. It's when Kathy and I worked together for the first time. I adore her. And that show, every night, every performance absolutely broke me open.
Yeah.
That's one of those roles. I think if I had played Golda before I became a mom, I don't know that it would have resonated so
Yeah.
deeply for me. But
Yeah.
since I am a mother, and when we did the show, Harper was 5 or 6. Trying to remember
Hmm.
what year it was. 2016, I think, is when we did it. Um, so she was still pretty little, and I just was, thinking about what Golda goes through and losing essentially like 3 of her daughters,
Yeah.
basically, at the end of
Yeah.
the show. Um, Another challenging show I did, or a big role, a show I really, really loved. Actually, two I would say are tied. Both Moxie productions. One was Bluebonnet Court,
Hmm.
which was a show I did in 2008. And I played a Jewish lesbian in World War II, who is driving from New York to LA to get she's been hired by a movie studio to do screenwriting.
Hmm.
And she gets into a car accident right outside um, this small town in Texas. So she's right in the Bible Belt. During World War II, and she falls in love with a Black woman who is played by
Hmm.
Monique Gaffney.
Hmm.
So I got to be in love with Monique Gaffney every night, which was a really, really hard job to have, let me tell you. But that was directed by Delicia Turner Sonnenberg. It was
Hmm.
on the Diversionary stage, and it was a co-production between Moxie and Diversionary,
Right.
and written by a wonderful friend of mine named Josh Gershik. That was a wonderful role. And then another show I did with Moxie, also on the Diversionary stage, was called The Butcher Baraboo, written by Marissa Wagerson. It was a supporting role, but it was just a really yummy,
Yeah.
fun,
Satisfying.
different. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I remember one of the reviews said, in a nearly wordless performance. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, I guess I didn't have that many
Right.
lines.
Yeah.
It was a juicy role, though. It was a sizable role. It was just, she wasn't a big talker. She was
Hmm.
more of a presence, and she was somebody who spewed a lot of dialogue.
Oh.
Um, and I think, again, that was directed by Delicia, co-directed by Delicia, and then Chelsea Kaufman. They co-directed that one. And I think one of the things I've always really loved about working with somebody like Delicia is that she puts me in roles I think maybe other people wouldn't necessarily see me in right away.
Yeah.
Almost every show I've ever done with Delicia, I've always played a role where I go, huh, this is a different one, but
Right.
this is great.
Yeah.
I didn't necessarily see myself in this, but this is great.
Is that a
So those,
challenge? Is that a challenge that you've hit a lot in town, where people want to put you in a certain place and you're like, but I want to be over here, or you've run into that wall a
yeah,
lot?
I don't know that I would call it a wall, but I definitely think that people or I don't know, typecast, but have me in a little box.
Yeah.
I'm a lot of people see me as really funny. So I'm often thought of for very broad comedy type roles. I'm not an ingenue. I've never really been the ingenue type. I've always kind of been the character actor type, which is fine. And now, I'm the mom. A lot of times I'm the mom character, which again is fine. I'm not one of these actors that's had a problem with aging into different points in my career. I don't really try to fight it. I've never been one to hide my age or lie about it or even fool myself about it. But I will say the first time I got cast as a mom, I went, ooh.
Right.
That's
There's
different.
that. Oh, that's like
Ooh,
I got a call one time to like play like a really old father, and I was like, okay. I mean, I could do it, but that's really
right.
okay. Because people
Yeah,
can age up, they can age down. Good Lord. So
absolutely.
obviously,
Absolutely.
we were in a show together where I did that.
I know. I remember that very well. Yeah.
Um. So is your mom still active?
She is to a certain degree.
Yeah.
She has gotten back into some community theater. She worked with on stage before they basically went professional. She did Rent with them.
Oh,
She
that's
was
right.
the
Okay.
oldest cast member,
That's
and
funny.
she was in Rent, and she was fantastic.
Yeah.
She's worked with Pal Pack and Pickwick, and maybe that's it. Yeah, she retired the year my daughter was born, so
Yeah.
11 years ago.
Yeah.
11 years this summer she retired, and one of the things she decided when she retired was that she wanted to get back into it. She didn't really perform a whole lot once I got a little bit older and she was working,
Yeah.
full time as a teacher, and she kind of put it on the back burner, but she's getting back into it now. And I love that. I love that she hasn't given up on it.
Now, sounds like you've already done this in some degree, but what are some dream roles that you would like to play? Because we've
Right.
talked about Into the Woods and we've talked
Right.
about
Yeah.
Golda.
Yeah.
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 What are some?
Baker's wife was one.
Are they
like
going to try and remount that, or
I don't,
who
they
knows? Yeah.
God bless. They're not trying to blow smoke up our, yoo-hoos. They're trying to be really diplomatic about it. They basically have said, if and when we revisit this show, you guys will all have rights of first refusal on your roles.
Oh, that's
so
good.
I'm clinging to that hope that at some point we will be able to revisit this before I age out of the role.
Right.
Some of my dream roles, I'm trying to think. I did this for Jeffrey Smith a few years ago when he was doing bucket list roles for the reader.
Oh,
And I'm
yeah.
trying one of them is Sister Aloysius in Doubt.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
would love.
Yeah.
And I got to see that with Cherry Jones, who is a goddess. Yeah, Baker's Wife is definitely one. I don't, it's so funny because it changes a lot as I get older or new shows come out or
that's true.
I revisit a classic.
Right.
Lady M will always be there.
Are you a big
Yeah,
Shakespeare person? I mean, you've done some
I am.
Shakespeare, obviously.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite Shakespeare plays?
Oh, I think my two favorite, my favorite play that he wrote is Othello, and I've been lucky enough to do that one twice.
Right.
First time I played Desdemona, second time I played Emilia. I just think that show is
Did you do those
perfection.
here? You must have done those here. Who'd you do that with? Was that
first one was with a community theater called Octad One,
right?
And that was with Deanna Driscoll and Grandison Phelps. I don't know if you know Grandison. He played Othello.
Okay.
I was 19. So it was actually the perfect age difference between Desdemona and Othello because she is, she's like 15 and he's in his 30s. And then the second time I did it was, I don't remember the year, but it was Delicia Sonnenberg directed it. And it was with a now defunct theater company called Women's Rep. And it was an all-female production of Othello. M. Laffey played Othello.
Mhm.
Joanne Glover played Desdemona. I was Amelia. Kim Strasberger was the Duke.
Mhm.
Gosh, I'm trying to remember who else was in that. Morgan Trant
Mhm.
was Bianca.
Mhm.
Gail Feldman was Iago.
Wow.
Yeah, it was this really amazing group of women.
Interesting.
Um, so I got to do that. I don't know if it was about 10 years apart from each other, but it may have been close to that. And then I would say the other one I really loved doing, and I would do this show again in a heartbeat, was when I did King John with Intrepid. And I played Cardinal Pandolph, which is the villain, like really the bad guy in the
Right.
show. And I was pregnant
Mm.
with my daughter when I did that show, and I was showing. So here I am playing a Catholic priest, basically, who's pregnant and evil.
That's funny.
And I just loved it. And they did a
Right.
really cool production of it where it was very kind of mafioso, because that's
Mhm.
kind of what the play is. It's
Yeah.
basically like a mafia family.
Right.
So it was a very mafioso feel.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that was great. I loved that
That's
show.
fun. That's
Yeah,
fun.
it was
That's
a lot of
great.
fun.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have anything on besides Into the Woods? Do you have anything like on the horizon after that, or is it? Are we?
I do. Actually, the next show that I am absolutely slated to do is at Onstage,
Hmm.
Admissions,
Oh,
with
okay.
James Darvis
Yeah.
directing.
Okay.
And that was a play that came my way a couple of years ago. I was actually cast in a production that didn't end up happening. I played the supporting role, and then James, after Carrie closed, reached out to me and said, "Are you familiar with this play?" And I said, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I actually really love this script."
Mhm.
Um, and I said I was supposed to do it, and I was supposed to play the role of Ginny. And he says, "No, no, 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 I want you in the lead. I want you in this role if we do this." So I got bumped up. But it's a great. Are you familiar with it?
Only a little bit. I don't think so. So yeah.
It's very timely.
Hmm.
It's a one act, which I love. I love me a good one act. The older I get, the more I'm like, one acts are awesome.
Yeah.
But it's really tackling race issues,
Mm. Okay.
particularly in the educational system. And it's one that's uncomfortable. And I love because it's a one act, the audience really can't get up and leave at intermission. They got to kind of sit there and
Right.
squirm in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so whenever we reopen, I know that that's on James's slate
Hmm.
for on stage this season. So
Good. Good. Well,
that
that
will
sounds
happen at
amazing.
some point, I'm hoping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, have you been working at all? I mean, like doing anything like virtually while we've been in this little down period?
A little bit here and there. I did some of Greg McAfee's radio play, which was really
Yes.
fun to do.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I've had a couple of virtual auditions for
Hmm.
some commercial stuff, which hasn't
Right.
panned out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I really haven't. I've tried to embrace the downtime, as
Right.
much as I miss theater and as much as I can't wait for all of this to open back up again.
Mhm.
I I always think about those times when I'm not doing a show and I get to be home at night, on the
Hmm.
weekends with my family.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and those are kind of like those little blissful moments
Yeah.
when you're half wishing you were in a show, but really grateful you're not in
Yeah.
that moment.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to kind of embrace that, because who knows, once we're back out there doing this, am I going to be super busy again, or do I need to
Yeah.
get used to being like this where I'm
Right.
I'm home all the time?
Yeah.
Um, I've spent a lot of time reading. I'm trying to catch up on just reading books, just regular good old books, and binge watching shows like a lot of people do. And
Sure.
I'm working 100% from home with my day
Hmm.
job, which
Hmm.
is great. I'm so grateful to have a job, and so
Right.
grateful to be working in education and doing what I do. So yeah, not really. I
Yeah.
haven't really done a whole lot.
Yeah.
This is, I don't think, a format I love.
No, I'm
Is
not in love
like
with it either. I see
yeah.
the need for people that are really just it's just torn the heart out of them, and they really need to be doing something. And I get that, I totally
Right.
do. But
Right.
it just doesn't, a lot of it doesn't translate. I mean, it's
Yeah, it
great to
doesn't.
see this or that, or see somebody do a song or do this, and it's great, but it's just not the same. It's not the
Right.
same of being, you don't get the same feeling. So are
Right.
you, if you couldn't do this, I mean, if you couldn't be an actor, I'm sure you've been asked this before, but if you couldn't act or be on stage, what would you be doing? You know what you would do? Maybe you can't answer that.
No, it is one of those questions I've thought
It is
about,
a
and
hard one.
I think the answer has changed over the years. I remember at one point as a kid, um, it's funny. I will say this. Not everybody knows this, but I was quite a soccer player as a kid.
Oh, okay.
I played for about 8 years, and I was oh, sorry, my co-star, my dog, is trying to get my attention right now. I played for about 8 years, and I was quite good. But at the time that I was a kid in sports, there really wasn't there weren't any female teams. It wasn't
Right.
one of those things that you thought you could do after school,
Yeah.
after you graduated high school or graduated college.
Right.
So my freshman year in high school, I kind of had to make the choice between doing theater or doing soccer. And I don't ever regret for a moment that I went the route I went, but there's that part of me that goes, if I had known that there would be women's soccer,
Right.
would I have maybe gone this path? So maybe that's what I would have done. Maybe I would have been
Yeah.
an athlete. I don't know.
Yeah. Or at least connected in some way in that field. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was very good at it, and I'm not an athlete by any stretch of the imagination. Like, I'm not somebody that can just kind of do anything naturally well
Right.
in an athletic way.
Yeah.
But soccer was just something that I played it for the first time when I was 6, and I just was good at it, and I liked it, and
Right.
I really enjoyed it. So it was something you continue to do for several years, and there's that part of me that's like, what if I had pursued playing soccer a little more
Yeah.
seriously? Who
Yeah.
knows? Yeah.
And the two are tied together because, you end up stuff you're good at, you just find, oh, wait, I'm actually really, this comes very naturally. That was me in
Right.
acting. I was like early on where people would make comments, and, I enjoyed doing it, but I watched other people really struggle with stuff. And I was like, not understanding at the time, like, why are you struggling with this? This is easy.
Yeah.
So I'm taking it as by no
This is the
means
most
easy,
natural thing in the
but
world. Yeah.
but it was
Yeah.
more natural for me at that young age. So, but
Yeah.
now it's very much a process. So, speaking of which, do you have a not so much a ritual, but I mean, I know for me, I have certain things that I do, but every role is different, like how I prepare for it, because each
Right.
role to me is different. So the demands of that role are different, so that my process changes when I'm working on a particular role. So large or small, do you have like a process that you go through? I don't want to get all mired down in your quote process, but do you have some like specific things that you could share?
Um, it depends on if I'm doing a musical, then because I am not somebody who has been trained, who has trained hardcore in the musical theater world. I came to it a little bit later. I mean, it was something I did in my youth, and then I gave it up for a while, and then I came back to it a little bit later. So I take voice lessons, or I did pre-pandemic with Lee Scarrett.
Right.
So if I'm doing a musical, I have to vocally warm up. I have to, because I have to get to that place with my level of feeling comfortable, and like I can handle this, but also just getting my instrument warm. In fact, when I did Carrie, I would sing every song in the show that I was in on the drive down. That was my part of my warm up, was just doing that. I've always been a really big fan of research. So if I'm doing something like, for example, when we did Bluebonnet Court, which was set during World War II, we did a lot of research into the queer lifestyle of
that period.
Of that period,
Yeah.
Which was so fascinating and really cool. Same thing with when you do Shakespeare. What was driving him to write this particular play at this particular point in time, what was happening in the world at that point, or if we're moving the time period to, like when I did Hamlet with Intrepid, we moved it to in the 40s, what was happening in the world at that point.
Right.
As I've gotten older, it's gotten a little more difficult to remember lines as easily. I used to be able to memorize dialogue like that. So I have to do a lot of repetition, running my lines over and over and over again. And usually that's just me at home, either recording it into my phone with my cue lines recorded into my phone and playing it over and over, or just looking at it on the page a few times, closing it, trying to remember it, I don't really have a ritual per se. And maybe I should, maybe that would help me to remember stuff better at this point. But for me, it's a lot of verbal stuff, whether it's a vocal warm up or saying my lines over and over again. That's kind of how things stick in my body.
What is your favorite? Do you have a favorite? I mean, we've talked about a lot of different things. We talked about, musical theater, doing a straight play, doing Shakespeare. What do you have a favorite that you really like to do? Or is it all kind of the same?
No, it isn't all the same. But, I think it depends on what's happening in my life at that point. When I did Fiddler, it was just, it was that moment in time at that venue with that director and that show. And it just sat so deeply with me.
Right. Was that the kind of show that you could have continued doing for months and months and months? I've been in a couple of shows like that where I was like, I want to recast this. And because there were a couple of people that just weren't plugged in, and I was like, I want to recast this and take it on tour. I want to keep doing this show. I want to fund it myself. So,
And I understand, when actors do reach their limit with the show, I get that. That was one of those shows that I could absolutely have done for years even. And I've even said to Kathy, if you ever remount it and you want to bring me along, I am game. I also had the most wonderful Tevye, Rudy Martinez, who is just
I know him. I saw him
him.
in Adam's Family.
Yes.
And of course he worked at Scripps. He did the Fantastic.
Yes. And he's Man of La Mancha at Oceanside. So I adore him. He is the most wonderful guy to be on stage with. And we had great chemistry, great fun together. I think I do kind of gravitate a lot towards comedy. I think one of the things I like, and Communicating Doors was this quite a bit, is the funny that all of a sudden takes you by surprise and knocks you on your butt, and you find yourself emotional.
Right.
Which was kind of the lovely thing about Communicating Doors, was that it was really wild and weird and funny, and then at the end very touching and very emotional. I do love ensemble work. I've always been a huge fan of working, like if I'm in an ensemble and we're just humming along, there's no better feeling than when you're surrounded by all of this, not just talent, but intelligence and sensitivity and support. And it's so glorious. So I really love a good ensemble. I love doing work that's directed by women and written by women. I have done a lot of work in my career where I've had female directors, not necessarily female playwrights. And I'd like that to change a lot in my life, but a lot of female directors and designers. And I do love that energy. It can be hard. We're kind of predisposed or we've been programmed in our brains to feel competitive with each other sometimes, or to feel like we need to one up each other in order to make ourselves feel like we belong, or like we're superior when one woman is working with another one. So sometimes I have to fight that nature within me, but I really do love working and collaborating with women. I forgot one of the really cool things I got to do was that staged reading of Reservoir Dogs.
Oh, right.
With Carrie Brown, where we did that all-female Reservoir Dogs, and that was really cool. I mean, that was one of those things where it was like, this is neat. This is really great.
I think Jen had a hand in that as well. I think she was.
She did. She did the sound for that too.
Yeah.
She did. Yeah.
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 And you guys talked about starting a theater company at OU, and Terry and Jen or something. I think there was
We did.
talk of that.
We were talking about maybe starting off with doing some staged readings. We were going to we were calling it Flip the Script, and
Right.
yeah, we toyed around with it, and it just kind of fizzled it fizzled out because it was a lot of work. And
It is a lot of work. Yeah.
at the time Terry was still AD at On Stage, and she had a
Right.
lot on her plate.
Yeah.
And then obviously after Carrie, after doing the last show with her at On Stage, shortly after that was when the pandemic hit. So
Yeah.
I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe it's something we need to maybe Jen and Terry and I need to sit down and revisit it.
Yeah.
Who knows?
It was a good idea.
It was.
She had a lot of Terry's got a lot of really good ideas as well.
She does. She's a smart cookie, that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So's your wife though too.
Yeah, she is. She knows. She has a lot of insight.
She is a smart one.
I bounce stuff off of her all the time and go, "What do you think about this?" She goes, "Well, I wouldn't do that because this is this." And I go, "Oh yeah, you're right." So
yeah,
it happens
she's
a lot.
Very insightful. She is a smart one.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give to somebody that's here, or as a young, not even here, but a young actress or actor that is looking to get into, like, wanting to do this as a living? Do you have any like words of wisdom that you would impart?
I probably don't have anything that other actors haven't said, which is, the standard things like make sure you really love doing this.
Yeah.
Make sure you make sure your skin is thick enough to withstand hearing no way more than you will ever hear yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality. I don't care how good you are or how accomplished you are.
Yeah.
Chances are you're going to hear no a lot more than you're going to hear yes. But I remember something one of my theater teachers told me when I was in college, and I firmly believe this, which is the more well-rounded you are as a human being, the more well-rounded you'll be as an actor. So the more things that you can show an interest in. And I think that what's interesting to me is I've seen a lot of my friends, my theater friends, that have branched out into different areas, particularly during this pandemic when they haven't been able to be on stage. Maybe this person over here has started writing things. This person over here has started painting or designing. Jason Heil, I think of him so often as somebody who I really admire, because I think he really got into the political dynamics of our country and educated himself big time on so many of the issues that we were facing as a country. And he was somebody I looked to as a beacon of honesty and patience and level-headedness in regards to so many things that we were all facing or have been facing. But I had a theater teacher that said, learn about current events, read books that have absolutely nothing to do with theater, learn about different religions, learn about different languages, learn about different cultures, travel, eat foods, listen to different kinds of music that aren't musical theater in nature. Like the more well-rounded you make yourself as a human being, then the more you will bring to the table as an actor. And I think so many times young up and coming actors feel like they have to have tunnel vision. Like it all has to be about doing this career path and going from taking a class to going on an audition to doing scene study and that's all great. I'm all for that. But I know, like in my youth, when I was first starting out, because I did have such tunnel vision about being an actor, even though I had this little nugget of advice in my brain from my teacher, I missed out on certain things, or I didn't partake in certain things that I think would have benefited me, like travel or concerts or food or people or whatever. And I just think that makes you all around a better artist, whatever your genre is.
Right. Well, you never know where you're gonna be able to pull from something, to use it on stage or what have you. And I've always said that, and Jen and I have talked about this, that I don't know any good actors that are stupid. You can't be a good actor and be stupid. You really can't. And I don't mean that as an insult to anybody out there doing it that feels like that, but just you've got to have you've not necessarily like a college education or even a high school education, but you need to be educated on various subjects. You can't be a student because you can't make good choices on stage informed choices. So
Right.
if you don't have it, and
You're kind of
unfortunately,
you're kind of a perpetual student, really.
yeah, you
If
really are.
you're a true actor, I feel like you
Hmm.
are a perpetual student, because there
Yeah.
will always be something new and groundbreaking and different, a different
Yeah.
story that needs to be
Hmm.
told, or a different character that
Yeah.
needs to be approached. So yeah, I agree. It's if you're not willing to learn and willing to explore, you're going to be very limited in
Yeah.
what your
And
talents are.
open-minded, and
Right.
open-minded. I mean,
Right.
I have my own ways of I think about things, but I'm open-minded to hear about, this viewpoint over here. I may not agree with you, but I respect that. Okay, it's that old saying,
Right.
uh and it's, yeah, I just, you have to have like a well-rounded, because it informs so much.
Right.
So as far as San Diego, you've primarily spent most of your time like acting in San Diego, right?
Most of
Right?
it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Have you done any film work, or
I've done
I know
some
you've done some
commercial work.
commercials. I
Yeah.
know that.
I did a couple of student films in New York when I
Hmm.
was at NYU.
Yeah,
And obviously I didn't work with anybody who has become like a Cannes Film Award winner or anything
right.
like that.
Yeah,
But I did, you befriended the film students, the acting students befriended the film students when we were in
sure.
college. And so I
Yeah.
was in a couple of student films here and there. No, I really haven't done a whole lot of film. It's one of those areas, I think, I mean, if I'm being really truthful, I adore film, but it scares me as an actor. I don't know that, and I know a lot of this is again programming in our head about the way we look, especially as women,
Oh, yeah.
as we
I understand.
age,
Yeah.
and your weight
Yeah.
and yada yada yada. But I also I am very naturally just a bigger personality, and vocally bigger.
Yeah.
I will say this: the closest I think I've come to film is when I did the car plays
Yeah.
at the La Jolla Playhouse
Hmm.
and Moving Arts, because it was in such a tiny, confined space
Right.
that Lisa Berger, who directed me the first time I did it there, she said to me on several occasions, "You've got to bring it down. Like you have,
Right.
you're going to hurt the ears of
Right.
your audience
Yeah.
members."
Yeah.
And I realized she was 1,000% right,
Mm.
but because I'm not somebody who's well versed in film, and a lot of the LA actors that did the car plays that came down from LA to do it were film actors, so they just
Hmm.
kind of naturally
Fell into
knew
that.
how to,
Right. Yeah.
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 But here were a bunch of us San
It's
Diego
funny.
actors that were blasting the
Right.
eardrums off of everybody that came in the car. So no, not really a lot of film. I have, yeah. I mean, other than a fear, I also I love the fact that theater is live.
Yes, absolutely.
Film is a dead medium.
It
It's a
it
wonderful medium, but it's dead. Once
it's
it's
a
on film, it's
different,
done.
it's just a whole different animal. I mean, it really
Yeah.
is. It employs a lot of the same things, so it's a real different animal. You're not
Yeah.
alone and watching yourself. Paul Newman never watched his own dailies. He never watched his own stuff. Couldn't
Yeah.
stand to watch himself. And you wouldn't think that. You wouldn't think that about him. You would think, oh, he hated
Yeah.
it. So, you're not alone. There's dozens and dozens of those.
Yeah,
So,
I don't know that I would do well with
yeah.
that. Although it's it's not something I've ever abandoned. It's just also something I've never really pursued
Yeah.
full
The other,
throttle. Theater's always really been where
sure.
my heart
Yeah.
is.
The other
Yeah.
thing about film is that you're at the mercy of a director and an editor. You could give the most stellar performance ever and
But it
walk
could get
away
on the
going,
cutting room floor.
and
Yeah.
half of it could end up getting
Yeah.
cut or getting
Yeah.
miscut, and your intentions are changed. Whereas in theater, you're in control, to a certain degree, to play within those parameters the director and the show and the playwright is set up. But I
Right.
mean, it's on you whether or not you connect or don't, or that role comes to life or what have you. So,
Totally.
is there anything about San Diego theater, and I'm sure you definitely have a voice on this, that you would change, that you would like to see change in the next like 3-4 years, or
I
evolve?
think we're starting to see this change, but absolutely employing more of our actors of color.
Hmm.
And making them a part of the narrative as
Yeah.
opposed to a part of the quota.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have worked with so many different types of actors and directors and designers and playwrights. And I can say without hesitation that the majority of my shows have been pretty pale in color. And I know as a white woman that I've had a lot of privilege that a lot of my fellow actors of color have not had. So I would like to see so many more of our, brothers and sisters in the acting world that are of color get those opportunities that I have had.
Yeah.
I would like to see more female playwrights. I would love to see more really women-led theater that are really celebrating being women. There's a lot of cliquey theaters here in San Diego.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of big talk.
Yeah.
I want to see, a lot of theaters have talked about how they do want to have change. They do want to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
I want to see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see some of these cliques get broken down. Not to say that there's not an incredible wealth of talent in this town, and a lot of these people are good friends of mine, but I do tend to see a lot of the same faces on the same stages over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. It's
And
hard. It's a trust thing.
It is.
It's a trust thing, and I totally get it, because as a director, it's hard, because I've taken a lot of chances on a lot of being pushed for a lot of new people. I'm very proud of my track record of hiring. I've probably in the last few years at Scripps, I've hired more new people than anybody else has ever done that. I've brought in more new people and brought people in, and I've tried to break down, and barriers and stuff when I can. But I'm all for giving that person that's like, this guy's good. If somebody worked with him a little bit, I think he'd be right on the money. Yeah. And I've proven it. And and I do see that, and it does happen. But as far as color and women, it's rough, and it's not just here. I mean, it's all over too. I'm all for it. So
another thing, this just popped into my head. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but this just popped into my head, and this is one of those things that I have to be careful how I say this, because I don't want to anger anybody, but I think we need to get rid of the idea that equity equals talent and non-union doesn't.
Yeah.
And we have very reputable theaters here in town that are equity houses. I get that. But I have had many of my friends who are equity actors say it is the hardest thing in the world to be an equity actor in San Diego, because even these reputable theaters don't hire locally. So I think it's twofold. I think we need to hire more of our own local talent pool. We don't need to go out of New York. We don't need to go out of LA. There's so much good stuff here. And we need to also stop equating union with talent. Those are two other things I would love to see change.
I agree with that. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a real double-edged sword, but yes. And that happens a lot where, and because my first experience with an equity actor was not good. I was very young, and he was horrible. Couldn't remember his lines, was late. And I'm like, this is not an example. And I've had some examples here where people who are supposedly professional that are equity and union and have been here a long time and have a reputation were absolutely horrible. So it doesn't mean anything.
No, it doesn't. And I've had similar experiences to what you've just said. Yeah.
And I think if somebody now, hopefully this changes, but I think if somebody was to become equity now, they would have to go in with eyes open and know you have to look for work elsewhere. And there is work up and down the coast. You can go to LA, go to Sacramento, etc. But don't count on getting hired here, because I agree with you. I love these local theaters that go, oh no, we're going to start hiring locally. And it's like, when is that going to happen? Because you said that about 5 years ago.
Yeah. I'm here.
I'm
here.
I'm
ready.
It.
Yeah.
And hiring a local person to play a bit part is not really cutting it. And I've seen that where that's like, okay, I had a friend that was at a big theater that was like very excited. And it's very cool, but it's like, not a very big part for you. So anyway,
no, I agree with that. Yeah.
Do you have any parting words, my dear?
Oh, I miss everybody.
Yeah.
I miss the human
Yeah.
interaction.
Me too.
I think that's probably the biggest thing I miss
Yeah.
about doing theater
Yeah.
is yeah, I mean, being an actor, being on stage, telling a really good
Yeah.
story, obviously that's huge, but
Yeah.
you make these little
Yeah.
families for this little period of time.
Yep.
Um, and sometimes that relationship extends past the show, like with you and Jen and people like Melissa Fernandez, who's one of
Yeah.
my closest friends, and Katie Rada and Fred Harlow, and the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't, and that's okay.
Hmm.
It can be just this little moment in time, doesn't lessen it at all.
Yeah.
I really miss that.
Yeah.
I miss those bonds and that
Yeah.
love. I think, my husband, I think when we first started dating, he really couldn't quite understand how I could get so close to somebody in such a short period of time. And I think to non-theater people, it is hard to
Yeah.
comprehend how you love somebody so quickly, how you
Yeah.
feel this sense of trust and
Yeah.
this sense of like, this person is my soulmate. I've only known them for
Right.
3 weeks, but
Yeah.
it's hard to describe. But there's so much intimacy that goes
Yeah.
into theater,
Yeah.
that you do forge these
Yeah.
friendships and these bonds so quickly, and I miss that with
Yeah.
all my heart.
Yeah.
Um,
Especially for me, if I'm playing with
yeah,
somebody that I'm romantically involved with, I actually end up falling a little bit in love with that person.
yeah,
It's
oh
even if
yeah,
I'm directing, it can happen. It's a very weird thing, and it
it
took me a
is.
while to understand it and dismiss it and go, and that it's. And I think that's how people hook up, is they
The
and then
showmance, yeah,
and yeah, the showmance, and then
yeah,
3 years later they're, why did they split up? Well, they split up because it was not real.
because it wasn't real.
So,
Yeah,
but
exactly, exactly.
yeah, I've had that happen a couple of times, but it actually works in my favor, which I'm very grateful for. But I've had some
Yeah.
definite things where I'm like, oh my God, but that's my focus. And I miss that too. I miss that interaction just backstage and the
Oh yeah, the
excitement of
dressing room
starting a
banter.
show
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
who's this person going to be to me in the show and who's you
yeah,
going to connect with, all of that stuff. Everything is new. So, and you
yeah.
get to relive and create those experiences. People don't get that because they start a job and then they're at that job
Right,
and they're at that job for how many years they're at that job. If you
right.
do 3 plays a year, you've done that 3 times, so
It's
it's very
exciting.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd say I miss you all of you
Mm.
artists out there, the actors I've worked with, those I have yet to work with,
Yeah.
those who are hurting, those who are, struggling. I miss all of you. I am in the fight with you. We'll
Yeah.
make magic again.
Yeah.
We
It'll
will.
happen.
I have to
It'll
believe
happen.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have a greater appreciation for it when we get back to it, I hope.
Ain't that the
So,
truth?
yeah.
I think we'll have a greater appreciation for everything. And I think hopefully we will have taken this time to um, recognize the importance and the beauty of what it is that we go out there and have the honor to create night after night.
Yeah.
Once we do get back out there, that
Yeah.
I think sometimes we do get to that point where we take it for granted. I know,
Yeah.
God knows, I've done shows where I'm dragging my butt into the theater, thinking, "Oh God, I'd rather be
Yeah.
at home right now, sleeping."
Right.
But I do recognize that it's my privilege
Yeah.
to say these lines, sing these
Yeah.
songs, share this stage with
Yeah.
these other souls, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll never take that for granted ever again.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Wendy, for
Thank
coming
you for
on.
having me.
Yes,
Give Jen and Harvey big hugs for me,
I
please.
will do that. And my love to all your family and
Thank
Harper
you so much.
and Brad. Just Brad. Only, is it just
Just
Brad or only? It's just Brad.
maybe is it maybe
Oh,
Brad?
maybe Brad. And
Maybe
maybe
Brad.
Brad.
It's maybe Brad.
It's
Yeah.
maybe Brad.
Maybe Brad. Yeah,
Sorry.
exactly. All right.
And thank you. So this has been Stage Perspective. We've been talking to Wendy Waddell, and we're going to put a link. You have a website. We're going to put a link to that down below. And if you
Yeah.
like this, please feel free to comment if you have a question or something, or if you want to share it, please do that and subscribe to the channel and check out some of the other videos that are here. I think you'll enjoy them, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.